Hello there, and welcome to the St. Barnabas episode of Seeds of Faith. My name is Christine Turo-Shields, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I've had the honor to be invited to speak with you today. I am actually recording from my kenosis counseling office. This is where I do therapy, and yet these days, rather than sitting with people, this is my vehicle to be able to talk to people. I've been doing telehealth therapy for nearly 2 months, and in many ways it's been a blessing, in many ways it's been a burden. And we're going to talk about that today. First, I want to say Happy Mother's Day. To those of you who get to be with your mothers and your children, may you just celebrate this opportunity. I know our state is beginning to reopen, and so having that connection, may that be just incredibly fulfilling for you. And for those of us who are not able to be with our moms or our children, whether separated by distance or even death, may you still feel the imprint and the love and the connection with your loved ones. I'm reminded, my mother's no longer with us, and yet I feel her imprint profoundly. May is Mental Health Month, and this has been an opportunity during these pandemic times. It has been an opportunity to talk about mental health issues, because we know that so many people are struggling with anxiety and depression and other mental health conditions. And my mom is close on my heart because she struggled throughout her entire life with anxiety, and in so many ways imprinted me. And today, working with people who struggle with anxiety is one of my areas of specialty, and that's due to my mom. Recognizing that there's a lot that can be done to help with these conditions and alleviate the suffering, right? We know that anxiety and depression can cause people to struggle. But my hope, wish, and prayer is that it can alleviate suffering. We can alleviate the suffering by giving more tools. And so today, I want to share some mental health moments during this mental health month. One of the things that we know is that our brain is the greatest miracle of God, and it is the most underutilized computer known to man. When we're dealing with mental health issues, it's really important to understand that mental health issues are just health issues. And again, with mental health coming to the forefront of our national awareness during these pandemic times, hopefully we can really break down the stigma so that people can move beyond the suffering and just recognize that these mental health struggles are just symptoms of the condition that they have. I work so much with people who struggle with anxiety, again, due in large part to my mom's struggles her entire life. But I remind them that those thoughts, so many individuals with anxiety are plagued with thoughts of worry and rumination and obsession and catastrophe, right? That catastrophic thinking of something bad is going to happen. And certainly that has been so much a part of my conversation with folks. One woman that I worked with was convinced that if she got COVID, she was going to die. Now, she did have some underlying health issues, but she was convinced that if she got COVID, she would die. And so we had to unpack that throughout the session. And one of the things that's important to remember, especially for people who struggle with anxiety and depression, is that worry loop, that rumination, that catastrophic thinking is the symptom of the condition. It's not in and of itself true, but a symptom of the condition. And additionally, our beliefs are stronger than facts. So she was making a declarative statement that if I get COVID, I will die, about the future. Which, until we get to the future, we don't know if it's a fact. So usually when somebody makes a declarative statement about the future, I go, I say to them, do you have ESP or do you have a crystal ball? Because there's really no, no truth in that. It's a belief that you hold. And so one of the tools that becomes really important when you're dealing with catastrophic thinking is to bring yourself back and acknowledge what is a belief, right? Because beliefs we can change. So that becomes critical. And I encourage people to use fair and accurate language, taking away some of the, if you will, absolutist statements like never, always, have to. Recognizing that the language that we use shapes our attitude. And so while individuals still struggle with anxiety and depression and may wrestle with the pain and the loss and the feeling plagued by it, the thoughts that we hold on to also at some level become a choice. Now, it's said, research shows that about, in an average day, we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts. So we can't control what thoughts come into our mind, but we can control if we're going to hold on to it, right? Imagine if you have 60 or 70,000 leaves swirling around you and you reach out and you grab one. You get to decide if you're going to hold on to it or if you're going to let it go. And so what I'm going to share now is just some ways to shift your thinking, to change the channel of your mind, to do some cognitive restructuring. And the first is evaluate a situation as to whether or not it's an inconvenience or a tragedy. So, in these pandemic times, we have had much inconvenience. As a consummate extrovert, having to do therapy via telehealth is an inconvenience to me. I crave connection. I enjoy sitting down with people and being in their presence. And so this has been a huge inconvenience. The inconvenience of not going to the grocery store, not seeing family, or, 3 of the 4 members of my family all got tested for COVID because we thought we were positive, or that we thought we could have been positive, but we weren't. And so recognizing what those inconveniences are, some people right now are struggling with not working, and other people are struggling with working too much. Some people are struggling with being around family too much, and then there are those of us that don't have access to some of our family, right? So the inconveniences versus the tragedy. Now, there are some tragic things that have happened during this time. I have known clients and friends who have lost loved ones to COVID. I have known individuals who have experienced death during this time. Tragedies do happen still, and no time is a good time, and sometimes are worse. But what happens in difficult times is that many people begin to associate an inconvenience with a tragedy. And interestingly enough, the gentleman, the very kind soul in the world, a former client of mine who gave me that wisdom and insight about evaluating if is it an inconvenience or a tragedy, is a gentleman who lived with HIV for probably 18 to 20 years before he finally passed away. And that was early in the day when people weren't living. And he basically said, this illness is an inconvenience in my life. It means I have to take a lot of medicine, need to be a little more careful, but it's an inconvenience. So I encourage you to step back from all of those things that are uncomfortable for us and begin to recognize, how much of that is just inconvenience. Especially in our St. Barnabas community. We have a lot of what I call first world problems. Now that doesn't mean that doesn't come without loss. It doesn't mean we have to negate that. There's such a duality that goes on, a duality of recognizing that we may be blessed, but there's also burdens. And we may have sorrow, but there's also joy. And life is really the ebb and flow. And in these pandemic times, it's important to give voice to both, but also not get trapped or caught up in the catastrophizing that can occur up here, and step back. And that's critical. Another thing that I would recommend for those who tend to struggle with catastrophic thinking is also evaluate. Let me back up for a moment. So we know that there's inconvenience or tragedy. And we also know that in life bad things happen. And certainly for many people right now, bad things have happened. But we also know that things are a possibility versus a probability. And so sometimes those catastrophic thinking, the thought of this will happen is really a possibility, but may not be a probability. And in that anxious thought, what happens in our brain is that our brain dumps adrenaline and cortisol, which actually are stress hormones, and they keep our body in a heightened state of anxiety, which actually also then depletes our immune system. So it all works against us. And so I think it's important to recognize, probably my biggest takeaway from this mental health moment is I want you to realize that the thoughts may come, but you don't have to stay with them. You can shift them, you can restructure them, you can acknowledge them and move on. So many of those thoughts, it's like coming to a radio station or television show that you don't like. So we either change the station or we just turn the television off, right? Change the channel of your mind. Recognize you don't have to be handcuffed by what's up here. So as I close for today, I want to let you know that I will be doing weekly mental health moments this month to keep bringing to you opportunities for examining how you can be healthier mentally and how you can really promote your own mental health, wellness, and self-care. So the biggest takeaway from today is that your thoughts do not have to cause you to suffer, and that there are many blessings amidst the burdens, and you can shift your thinking to focus on that. So what I would say is, for those of you that may still really be struggling, I would encourage you, if you haven't tried counseling before, I encourage you to do that. You can talk to your employer. Many jobs have employee assistance programs, EAP programs. They can provide a recommendation, calling your insurance company, or you can also feel free to contact the church and they can put you in contact with somebody. But reach out for help. Just know that you don't have to suffer. There's a statement that says, pain is inevitable, but misery is optional. And suffering is optional. So, feel free to continue to follow along. You can find Seeds of Faith on the YouTube channel and Facebook. And there's also a link on the St. Barnabas website. So I want to leave you with one final quote for today. So many people talk about needing to stay optimistic during these times of struggle. And one of my favorite quotes is actually a quote by Václav Havel. He was actually the first elected Czechoslovakian president. And He states, because everybody talks about being more optimistic, and I consider it more about being hopeful. So his quote is, "Hope is not the same as optimism. It's not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense no matter how it turns out." And in these pandemic times, it's eventually going to make sense to us all. And I wish you well and many blessings. Goodbye.